Have you ever, like, really bitten your tongue trying to be considerate about something? It's like, sometimes I feel like I'm going to step on a landmine of good intentions, you know? Especially with something as, I don't know, sensitive as autism and neurodiversity. And I think that's why we deep dive, right? To really get into these things. So today we're looking at this article, and it's from Cheap ABA. They're all about making ABA therapy more accessible, so you know they're really in the thick of it when it comes to understanding autism. Anyway, the article is called, get this, Person First Language versus Identity First Language, Why It's a Personal Decision.
I mean, that title alone, right? It really makes you think about the words we use.
It's really interesting because language isn't static, right? It changes and evolves.
Yeah.
And these terms, person first, identity first, they're not just words. They show a much bigger shift in how we think about disability and neurodiversity.
Okay, before we get too far, can we just define our terms here? Give me the plain English version. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So person first language, or PFL, is basically saying person with autism. So you're putting the person first, right? And then you have identity first language, IFL, which would be like saying autistic person. So it's acknowledging that being autistic is a part of who they are, not something separate.
Okay, I get it. But I guess where I get tripped up is, why does it even matter? Isn't it just like semantics at that point?
See, and that's where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because PFL, it came from a good place, right? It was moving away from just labeling people by their disability, nothing else. Like, we wanted to see the whole person, which is important. But the thing is, for some people, their disability is a core part of their identity. It's like saying someone's a musician. It's part of who they are, and they own that.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense when you put it like that. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, it's how you define yourself. It's not just about other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it might seem like a small difference, but it shows a move from this medical model of autism, where it's seen as a deficit, to more of a social model.
Yeah.
And that social model says, hey, neurodiversity is just a different way of being. It's not inherently good or bad.
So it's less about one being right and one being wrong, and more about like understanding where each perspective is coming from.
You got it. It's kind of like some people, they prefer Dr. Smith, and others, it's John, both are totally fine. It's just about respecting the person. And that's exactly what this Cheap ABA article stresses. They even use the phrase personal decision, which I think is really key here.
Oh, for sure.
It's not about following some strict rule book, It's about recognizing that what feels respectful to one person might not feel the same to another.
That reminds me of this time I was at this conference, right? And someone was introducing a speaker who was blind. And they used person first language, like person who is blind. And afterward, the speaker super politely was like, I actually prefer blind person. It's how I identify. And it was like this light bulb moment for me,
Truly.
like realizing how much words matter, even when we're trying to be sensitive.
It's so true. And it shows how important it is to be open to that feedback, to actually adjust our language because of it. We can all learn from each other, right? But that doesn't mean it's one size fits all either. And the article actually mentions this, how context matters too.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about it. Like professional settings, they might naturally lean more toward person-first language. It can feel more formal, maybe even a little clinical, depending on the field. But then say you're part of an advocacy group or you're in an online community, you'll probably see a lot more identity-first language. It's like different spaces have different norms.
Right.
And being aware of that is really important.
Yeah. So it's like, you wouldn't use a hammer to fix everything.
Exactly.
You got to use the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
And really, it all comes down to being respectful, right? Like more than getting the language exactly right every time. That's kind of the vibe I get from this Cheap ABA article.
Totally. 100%. They even talk about, like, if you're not sure, just ask. Ask the person what they prefer.
Yeah, yeah.
It's such a small thing, but it makes a big difference. Shows you care,
It really does. Reading this got me thinking this whole thing, person first versus identity first. It's not just about autism, is it? Like, we're seeing these same conversations everywhere now.
Oh, absolutely. Gender identity, mental health, even cultural background.
Yeah.
It's all connected to this bigger thing about how we talk about identity,
Yeah.
and how we respect that.
It's wild. It's like this article gave us this decoder ring for how to have any sensitive conversation better.
Totally. It's not even about memorizing the right words. It's more about, like, being curious and willing to learn, even make mistakes sometimes.
Okay, so someone's listening to this, right? And they're like, whoa, that's a lot. Where do I even start with all this? What would you say?
Honestly, start with listening. Pay attention to the words people use to describe themselves. And if you're unsure, Just ask a simple, hey, what pronouns do you use? Or what's the best way to refer to blank? It goes a long way.
Totally. It's like remembering that language is powerful. We have this responsibility to use it well, use it respectfully.
Exactly. And look, we're all going to mess it up sometimes, right?
Oh, for sure.
We're all learning. What matters is being open to that.
Hmm.
And just, coming to these conversations, wanting to understand, wanting to be respectful.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, there you have it. Our deep dive into the whole world of person first and identity first language. We covered what it is, why it matters, and how to actually put it into practice. Biggest takeaway: be respectful, be curious, and remember that language is always changing. Keep asking, keep listening, keep learning, and you're going to be well on your way to having these really important conversations in a way that's genuine and authentic.